Welcome to Epic Conquerors. Your host, Dr. Judy Bauer and Chad Smanjack. You are epic. Everything is possible in Christ. The battle is real. The victory is assured.
Welcome to all our Epic Conquerors, and thank you for joining us once again on the Epic Conquerors podcast. Today, as always, I have Mama J with me.
Woohoo.
Affectionately known as Mama J, otherwise known as the General.
Watch it.
Mama J, today we've got a topic that is really close to my heart, and it's something that I think is absolutely foundational and desperately needed in order to live a successful and fulfilled life, and that is tested faith.
Yeah, Chad, I don't think there's a more important topic in our whole Christian experience than to grab a hold of this principle and understand it, because tested faith compared to untested faith is a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, like many people say, yeah, I've got faith to do that and faith to do that and all the rest of it. But the reality is at the end of the day, it's about the tested faith. When is that faith put into action to get the results that you're truly looking for? So I'm really excited, Mama J, about doing this tested faith. I know you wrote this devotional, and really, when I went through it, it's amazing. It hits on so many great points, and I think everyone's going to get a lot from today's podcast. So we're going to jump right into it, and I'm going to start off with where you started off with on your devotional. Sound good?
Yep, sounds good to me. Let's go for it.
So many of us know the story when Jesus tells his disciples to get into the boat and go to the other side of the lake, right?
Yep, it's very familiar.
Very familiar, yeah. It's such a famous one. And he wasn't joining them. So they were probably a little surprised at that point. They're like, well, because they're always together, right? And
right. So
as we know, they kind of draw their faith from being around Jesus, right? So he's like, hop in the boat, go to the other side.
Yeah, and I think they probably thought, well, maybe he went in another boat, to bless some other people or something.
But so many times, and right there, so many times, we get around certain people, whether that be your friends, your family, or your loved ones, whatever, and you really start to rely on them so much that you kind of lean to them for their faith. So that's why I'm going through this whole process. It's tested faith. It's about testing your faith too.
Yeah.
But, and so many times, like our perception, Mama J, of what we think God wants from us and the way we process that and what he truly wants can be so different, right?
That's so true. I think often we want to hang on to somebody else's coattails and let their faith be what catapults us into our destiny and our future. But God's like, this is a relationship between you and me, baby. And we're going to walk this road together. He lets others come alongside and encourage and this and that. But, at the end of the day, our own faith in the things that God has spoken to our hearts has to go through this refiner's fire or this testing process to bring it forth as pure gold. So it's really an important topic. And this little story just really gives us a lot of principles to help us understand that better, I think.
Yeah, there's a couple different stories, and I always like to glean the ones where Jesus is involved, obviously, because that's where you really get, the good juicy stuff. Because so many times, we kind of distort. We'll get a word, or we'll feel like we've received this word from God, or someone will give us this word, but then as we allow that to get into our mind and our mind starts to take over, right, we start to distort that word into what we want, into the results that we're truly trying to achieve. And we're like, oh, well, a little bit of that. And maybe, now we've baked the cake and it's like, this is how it came out, but that's not really what the cake was meant to be.
That's
so we
right.
justify our actions.
Yeah. I've got some words that were given to me like 40 years ago or so. And I thought so many different times, this is that word coming to pass. This is that word coming to pass. And then it wasn't that word coming to pass. So it's like, oh, okay. Because we're a microwave society, right? We got less attention span now than a goldfish, they say. So we want everything yesterday. And God just isn't in a hurry. He's like a big crock pot. He's going to let us stew in it and get really all the goodness out. So yeah, it's a different mindset. We have to constantly remind ourselves because we get so, yes, I want it today. And I want it this way.
Wow. And 40 years, getting words 40 years ago and still holding on to them. That's good, Mama J. I like that.
Yeah, I was just reading some of them the other night and I went, oops, okay, Lord, I see that. that's not what you meant there. Okay.
Yeah, and it's in this process of life that we go through, and all these different journeys and these trials and tribulations that we experience. It's really in those times that our faith is refined. That's when we really start to build that faith, because let's be honest, like it doesn't take much faith to when things are going great, right? It's
Right.
like, oh, I got all the faith in the world, everything's working out great, I'm creating this, and then suddenly everything turns around and goes south, and then you're like, oh, what happened? Where's the faith now?
But God, I was believing you. So that's where the rubber hits the road, and we find out if we had untested faith or tested faith. And I think it's interesting, Chad, because so many people, if you talk to them about you have to take a test, they freeze, they paralyze, just the thought of taking a test. So we kind of don't like that idea. And I think maybe because when we were kids in school or whatever, and we took a test, so much rode on that test, and maybe we didn't actually do our studying or our homework. So we had good reason to be a little bit nervous about the test. And so it built this thing in us that we just don't like tests. We freeze and panic. But in the system of God, our faith is going to be tested, and he's not worried about our temper tantrums and our moaning and crying and everything else. He's like, nope, you got to go through the real deal.
Yeah, and I love that because sometimes Christians will think, well, God doesn't test you, that's not true, da, da, da. But like you said, the reality is it's through those tests and those trials and tribulations and everything else that we experience, that's really him helping us as his children grow, right? Because at the end of the day, the currency of heaven is faith. So our job is to grow in that faith, and to grow in that faith, we need to walk through situations where we can truly see the hand of God getting us through. And for me, that's where I always get to. It's like, it's always when you're at the end of your end, and you've run out of answers, you've run out of solutions, and you're like, that's when you suddenly go, okay, God, I need you now.
Yeah.
I just don't have it. And then you suddenly humble yourself. But before that, you got it. But then when you got it until you don't get it.
And he was like, I was wondering how long that was going to take you to
and
come
he's
to
patient.
your senses. But Chad, if you think about, like, we wouldn't even want to fly in an airplane unless we knew that plane had been tested, right? Mm-hmm. And so test pilots have to go through a rigorous, invigorating process with those new planes that they put out, and they run it through all kinds of other tests as well. And we wouldn't want to fly on something if we didn't think it had been tested, and make sure that it's the genuine thing and it can really fly. And so we like testing on something like that. But when it comes to our faith being tested, that's a whole nother thing.
That is true. I think when it comes to us in general, like when anything, it's like, oh, well, I have to go through that test. Oh, I have to do that. Yeah. It's like, but
instead we should welcome it, because we really have to realize, bring it on. Because I want to know that my faith is firmly rooted and planted in solidness of the genuineness of Christ. I don't want to be having flaky faith. I want solid, good gold faith. And so bring it on, test it. Let's see, will it stand the test of time? If not, then let's get rid of that.
Well, and that's also why it's important to test that faith, because we can have faith in ourselves and then misconstrue that as faith in God. And we're like, oh, no, I've got faith. But you really got faith in your ability to get things done. But having faith in God is a lot different, right? Because that's when you realize that you can't do it. And even though the situation looks like there's absolutely no way to get through it, your faith, because of your belief in God, will get you through it.
Yeah, that's so good. You could preach that, Chad.
That reminds me of the, prior to the whole, what we were just talking about with regards to the boat, with, again, the disciples in the boat, when Jesus tests his disciples. So we even see it right there, right?
Yeah.
So many times through, his journeys with his disciples, he would test their faith. Because
not once, not twice, but many times we can see that. Even up to the very end, when Peter failed and denied that he knew Christ. I mean, all of those were testings all along the way.
Yeah, I mean, if he never tested them, I mean, especially for his disciples, think about it. Yeah, you are with Jesus Christ, Almighty God, doing all these miracles. So your faith now, their faith was probably really attached to his faith. They're like, oh, we're with the man right now.
Yeah. Don't leave us.
Yeah, so he had to put them through that, because obviously he understood that he was leaving and they needed to be, have their own faith. So this story, when he talks about and he challenges them to feed the crowd. Like he doesn't get into a long thing. He just says, feed them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, pretty much in my own paraphrasing.
Yeah.
He's like,
yeah.
don't feed
and there's
them.
no
And
grocery store around the corner, right? It's like,
and you can imagine their face. I mean, when he said that, they probably all looked at each other like,
did you bring anything?
what's going on here? Feed them?
Did you bring something? I thought you brought something. Who brought something?
We've got thousands of people here. What are we going to do about this? And Jesus probably like turned around and went like this, gave him a little wink and said, come on, get on it.
Yeah, because he knew what he could do. Yeah.
You know, we see that so many times, right? And it was always like people always say, not what people always say, but many people when you're speaking to them and just sharing with them, they'll say, well, you know, why doesn't God just take care of it? Like, why doesn't God can do everything. Why doesn't he just handle it or just do it? And we come to learn when we read through these scriptures and see these different experiences. God could do it, no problem. He could go boom and it's done. But he always wants us to be involved in the miracle and everything that's happening so that we can learn, so that we can be tested, see it. And
I think we see a big example of that, Chad, in our society today. People want everything to be a handout. They don't want to have to be responsible or to be grown up. They just want somebody else to take care of all their issues. And it's like, there's no joy in that. You're just a spoiled brat, right? Have to grow up and really be a man, be a woman, right? And then you can really thrive in your life. But when you only get handout all the time or rescued all the time or whatever, you never get to try your own chutzpah, you know, you just don't grow into a person that's got value.
Yeah. And I think that's sadly part of what we've seen in our generation today is that people truly don't want to feel the pain, or they don't want to walk through the challenges, or they don't want to go through the refining fire. And I mean, that just doesn't really lead to a stable foundation for you to grow. And to, you know, you got to go through this, you got to lean on God. You got to realize that I just can't do it. You got to have that experience.
Yeah. I saw a meme the other day where 50 years ago, a bunch of kids just riding in the back of a pickup truck, you know, which is my generation. And then the meme showed today's generation where the kids in the back seat are all seat belted, buckled in, have bubble wrap all around them, you know, to protect them from any little, and it's like, oh, you wimp, you know, come on, live dangerously.
I know sometimes I can imagine you could too, Mama J, but I'm sure if you share some of the, you know, today when you share some of them, people look at you like, oh, you crazy, whatever. But it's, you got to take everything in context, right? Yeah. Read about the times. I'm sure, you know, when you were maybe driving around with your, you know, young kids back in those days, you know, they were in like, you know, they were in their stroller on the back. Obviously, we live in a different world, but like you're saying with that, you know, today, if you just.
Yeah, my kids slid right out of their little holder right onto the floor of the car.
I think we used to sit on the floor most of the time. I remember like falling off, we'd be sitting at the bottom of the back seat, you know, where your feet are. It's, you know, it's just, it's different. And then, you know, it is what it is, I guess. It's different. But
I remember on one road trip, it was snowing like everything because we lived in Indiana then, and I was the oldest of four. And my younger brother was sitting between me and the door, and somehow the door got open and he flew out of the car. And so all of a sudden, this other car comes up alongside Dad and just starts honking his horn and like tells him to roll his window down, you know. And so he rolls the window. He said, something fell out of your car. So Mom turned around to count noses and realized that Andrew was gone, her baby. So she jumps out of the car and runs through the gully, you know. But if it hadn't been snowing, he probably would have died. But it was snowing and he had a soft landing. But I mean, those were way different times than today.
Way different times. You know, and to talk about this testing, that you would think you know, over and over again through the Bible, we read about, you know, God, Jesus, everyone just they're going through this different testing process. And what always amazes me, like, even so much of it is the same today as it was back then, because do we ever learn from these experiences? You know, we watch all these amazing demonstrations of faith. I mean, think of the disciples, and, you know, we fortunately today get to read about them, even knowing
they didn't
that it's
have
a word.
that. Yeah.
You know, they lived and saw maybe one right in front of them. We literally can read through the Bible and study it and have it absorbed every day, going, let me read this miracle, that miracle. And we still have a hard time exercising faith when it comes down to it.
A little bit thick, I think.
I think that's obviously why it's so important, Mama J. That's why, it's the currency of heaven, because even though it seems on the surface such a simple thing, right? And it truly is a simple thing, and it's even more simple when things are good. But man, do we fall short?
Yeah.
When it
And
comes
I
to
think
faith.
in our story that we're looking at now, when he told them to go to the other side of the lake, that was a familiar trip for them. They'd done that 100 billion times. That was their livelihood, fishing as well. So they were real familiar with boats and water and this and that. So nothing difficult about that. And that was definitely simple instructions. He didn't say, go to this lake, turn left and go to that lake and turn right and go to that lake. He just said, go across the lake. So away they went. But then evening came. And then, like so often in our life, it's those dark nights that, or seasons of the dark that grab a hold of us and start testing that faith in us. And then on top of that, a strong wind starts blowing. And now the water and the waves are just really rising and crashing, and their mode of transportation is now on the verge of capsizing. So that is scary, right? I mean, my goodness, like you feel so vulnerable out there in the middle of a big storm.
But that can kind of be like life, right? I mean, that's a great analogy of our lives sometimes. When you're thinking about that, I was just thinking, sometimes I feel like I'm out in the middle of the ocean in a big storm.
Yeah.
And it's like, you just don't know where to grab, and the boat's rocking, and you just get consumed. And then it's like, as soon as you look down, it's like when you're walking across that bridge and you look down and you see that roaring river below you, you suddenly become paralyzed in faith. Then the noise is around you.
Yeah. And I love God's sense of humor too. I mean, he knows they're freaking out, right? So now he's like, do, and he's just going to walk on top of the water. And of course, they've never seen anything like that before. So they're like freaking out full on now, because what is happening? Must be point of death because we're seeing things, but just imagine the terror. I mean, it just had to just be like 10 plus on the Richter scale. But sometimes life is like that for us too. I mean, and that's why it's so helpful to have friends in the faith and so on and so forth that can help us find our moorings sometimes, because we're getting rocking all over the place. But we still do the same thing that these guys did. Like you said earlier, we hear a word from the Lord, or we get this thought in our heart that we feel is from God. We start out on that activity thinking, yes, I can do this. And then along the way, evening turns into darkness, and all of a sudden now we can't see what to do or how to do it. And our faith is in the process now of being tested. Initial phase.
And the thing, and like we said, even while we're going through that process and it's being tested, we know from reading the scriptures and seeing the process, because God's the same yesterday, today, and forever, right? Beautiful. So we know those same things that happen. So even when we're going through that and we feel that he's not there, he's literally right beside us.
Yeah.
So really it's kind of like, it's almost like, and this is, it's almost like having those bumpers on when you go to the bowling alley, and you're allowed to bump back and forth, and he's got his bumpers there. And he's like, all right, we're bouncing back and forth. And he's like, all right, we just got to keep, it's kind of like, I got you. I'm hurting you. Just stay inside the bumpers and you're going to be okay.
Oh, man. I heard a most amazing, cute little story the other day, and I want to share it really quick because it's about this little boy named Martin. And his parents took a trip to see grandma every month, and they came home on the same train every day. So it was constant repetition, same thing, just like these disciples in the boat. And one day the child says to his parents, I'm already grown up. Can I go to my grandma's alone? And after a brief discussion, his parents accepted. So they stood with him as he waited for the train to exit, and they said goodbye to their son, and they gave him some tips through the window. And he goes, I know all this. 1,000 times you've told me this. So as the train was about to leave, his father murmured in his ear and said, son, if you feel bad or insecure, this is for you. And he put something in his pocket. So now Martin was alone on the train. He was sitting there like he wanted without his parents for the first time. He was so excited. He was admiring the landscape out the window. But then different passengers started coming on and sitting next to him and around him, and noises started happening. And then a big guy sat right next to him, and the conductor made some comments to him about him being alone. And one person looked at him with sad eyes like, you poor child, you're all by yourself. So he started feeling really uneasy with every minute that was passing. And now he was scared too, because all of a sudden, he didn't have that comfort of his dad right there. He felt cornered and alone. He put his head down, and with tears in his eyes, he remembered Dad put something in his pocket. So he searched for what his dad had given him, and he found a piece of paper. And his dad said, "Son, I'm in the last train car." That is so cool. It's like, yes, we think we're all alone and the big boogeyman's out there, but God's in the train with us. He's just watching from a distance. And I love that.
I love that. That's great.
Yeah.
That's something to constantly revisit for all of us, right? Because
yeah,
it feels really lonely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're living in times right now. And again, one day we'll listen to these podcasts again and remember these times, but these are lonely times. And any of our epic conquerors that are out there, I mean, we understand it. I mean, we're all experiencing it. The time of there's no interaction, no touching, no, people being around. Our communities are being shattered.
Drastic, hardcore weather issues. I mean, just all kinds of stuff going on, isolating people and taking them out of their normal stuff. Yeah, it's tough. And all the kids are suffering in certain kind of ways. And yeah, it's very terrifying if you want to let it be that way. You just have to remember Jesus is in the last train car.
That's it. That's where I was going. It's like, even with all this crazy chaos going on, we've got to remember that he's riding that last car. Sometimes it might feel like he's abandoned and left you, but he's never left you. He's never going to forsake you. And he's always going to be there. Yes. And we are more than conquerors in Jesus Christ.
Yeah, because we're epic.
Because we're epic.
Everything.
So just accept it. Just accept it. When your faith is being tested, just roll with it.
Just realize that's what it is. I think if we realize that's what it is, sometimes it'll help, because when we don't know what's going on, that's why it's more scary. But if we realize, okay, this is the testing process, the refiner's fire. Okay, bring it on. Let's do this and let's power through, And that's what they did. They kept rowing and rowing and rowing and they still weren't quite coming out of it, right? And sometimes in our process, we want it to be like, okay, once I've accepted that I'm in a process, then it should be done. But no, now we have to keep on rowing, or keep on keeping on, as I always say. And it doesn't seem like there's much progress for all the effort we feel like we're expending. And that's kind of what they were going through. And I'm wondering, in our Epic Conqueror community, how many of you feel like you're doing that right now? You're just rowing and rowing and rowing. And it's like, I'm not seeing much benefit from this. Am I even getting anywhere?
You feel like you're on one of those rowing machines and you're not moving.
Yeah. It's constant repetition. I'm like, oh, Lord, when? Yep.
Well, I love the way you paraphrase that in the sentence. It says, and then it happens, he speaks. And he goes, I'm with you. Don't be afraid. Like, it's so, I'm just trying to like frame that picture right there. The oceans are going crazy. You're freaking out. We're freaking out. We're on the boat. The noise is loud. You can imagine how loud it is out there.
Oh, yeah.
And then suddenly you see Jesus walking on the water. Yeah. First freak out. And then he's almost there. He goes, don't worry. Like, what are you worried about? You're like, you almost want to scream at him. Where have you been? Oh, how dare you leave us?
We were about to drown.
We almost died. So
tested faith. Oh,
tested faith. We can laugh about it, and we were tested yesterday, and we're most likely being tested at some point today and tomorrow. And like you said, we have to accept the fact that this is part of the growing process. Yeah. If you want to grow in your faith, if you want to grow in your relationship with God, if you want to get closer to Jesus, there's going to be a process of testing your faith and learning through experiences, and some of them aren't going to be as comfortable and as nice as you think they are.
Yeah. And that's why it's so helpful for these podcasts, but also to have friends that understand this as well, so that when we are getting the rug pulled out from underneath us, or when we are getting the sucker punch, or when life is really trying and difficult, others can come up alongside and say, you got this, and just keep on rowing and let your faith be tested. It's going to come forth as pure gold. And as you've said already a couple of times, faith is the currency of heaven. And so we have to understand that we want to trade with gold, not toilet paper. You know what I mean?
Well, I don't know. In the pandemic, toilet paper might be worth more.
Yeah, well, that's true. For a while there, it was a really valuable commodity.
That's funny. Oh, man. So Mama J, as we've gone through this, what spiritual weapon was speaking to you, or popped out, or did you feel was relevant to this situation or this conversation that we're having?
Well, so many times we've chosen faith as a spiritual weapon, which obviously that is true. But then I was thinking about it as I was pondering on our podcast that we were going to do. And I really realized, there's a difference between tested faith and untested faith. So I thought my spiritual weapon would be tested faith, because if our faith is tested and we know it's solid, man, we can slay giants with that. We can tell the devil where to get off. And, it's powerful. But when it's not tested, we don't wield it as strongly or as purposefully, right? Because we're unsure. And so it is important to have our faith tested, so we know that no matter what happens, God, you're in that last train car. We're going to the destination which you purpose for us, and that's important.
Tested faith. I like that. When I was thinking through it, it was pretty much on the same vein as what you're talking about. I was thinking of refining faith. So tested faith and refining faith, because so much of us, there's so much in us that we need, that, God has us on that refining process, or that wheel, like gold, right? And silver, you got to refine out those impurities. And to get that done, you need to have faith.
Yeah. And to get that done, we're talking about gold as an analogy. I mean, they have to heat that fire up so hot beyond what you can comprehend, right? For that to really happen. So it's like, sometimes that's what it feels like the heat's been turned up majorly and we still have to hold steady in the midst of it and just know in our knower that God's with us, and he told us to do XYZ. So we're going to power through with him and get to that other side. Yeah. And we're going to do XYZ, whatever that is.
And then we always have our affirmation. Well, we have our, we have the Epic Conquerors affirmation that we
our
speak
power
out all the time.
affirmation.
Power affirmation. Everything is possible in Christ because
That's
you are
right.
epic.
That's right.
So from an affirmation with respect to this conversation, Mama J, what do you have for us today?
God is my source. I cannot fail. Ooh,
whoa, love it. Powerful.
If that's solid in us, we can make it through anything, because no matter if the report ends up being one that we didn't even want, we can still know that God is able to take and make something beautiful out of tragedies or out of difficult things, So it doesn't matter really. There's an old song, whose report will you believe? I will believe the report of the Lord. We used to sing that with all this gusto, and then it comes down to where you're getting tested and you're like, but God is our source. So that has to be a kind of a constant, that we go back to that and take refuge in that place. God is my source. I cannot fail. Are you ready, Chad? We're going to do the drum roll. Everybody on your car dash, your steering wheel, your lap, your desk, wherever you are, somebody's shoulder next to you, whatever. Just don't pound on their head. All right. A drum roll. And on the count of 3, God is my source. I cannot fail. Here we go. Drum roll. 1, 2, 3. God is my source. I cannot fail.
Powerful. Like you said, Mama J, if you can get that deeply embedded inside your spirit, where it's just like a river overflowing, that'll keep you going. That'll fuel you on a daily basis for sure.
Yeah. It was just if we'll remember it. That's the part.
Well, we'll remember it now. The problem is we'll remember when everything starts shaking. You're like, oh, what happened?
That's it. Yeah. When the winds are blowing and the waves are crashing and we're getting soaked by the torrential rains, and then we see things that we can't believe with our own eyes that we're seeing that look so contrary to what our normal is. That's where we have to hunker in on that. Nope, God, you're my source. I cannot fail, and let it bring you through victoriously. Awesome.
Well, let's keep that front and center. Tested faith. God is your source, our source, always is, always will. And he's never out of sight or out of reach. He's always with us.
Yeah.
Always. Like you said, he's just right there in the back cart.
So many times we think, if I could have just walked with Jesus, like they did in the Bible days. But actually, we have a better thing. Even Jesus said, it's better for you, actually, if I go away, because then you'll have the comforter. We actually have it better than those disciples did who walked with Jesus in the flesh. because we have the Spirit of Christ with us always as born again believers. And then we have the written scriptures in 20 different translations or whatever. I mean, we just have so much access to the power and the Spirit of Christ. And I think that's just, we should say, thank you, Lord, that we were born in such a time as this to be your witness in the earth today.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, on that powerful word, Mama J, I think we're going to call it a wrap.
Pretty much. We just want to thank everybody first and foremost, though, for just helping us spread the word, share this podcast with your friends and family. I mean, how awesome will it be that everybody in your circle of influence understands tested faith? Then you could really encourage one another when you're going through those turbulent times. And that would be a tremendous blessing to everyone. And also you can find us on YouTube. Go to Epic Conqueror Videocast, and you can find these live recordings and see what our face is doing while we're sharing all these wonderful things. And that would be a blessing as well. So we just want to thank you, and join our Epic Conqueror Facebook community as well, and catch us in there too. That would be great. So now, Chad, it is time to say,
it's that time, Mama J.
Ciao for now.
Ciao for now.
Bye, everybody. God richly bless you.
See you soon. God richly bless you. Love you all. Bye.
Bye-bye.